Kia ora no tātou katoa. Kia ora everybody, my name's Taki Peke and I'm Māori advisor for IHC, and it's my pleasure to open with a karakia this afternoon. To many of you, this is a different type of karakia. We go more traditional way where we utilise the energy within the room. We're going to utilise everyone's energy and everyone's thought to start this event. And from that energy, we hold that energy right till it's ending, and from there we'll lift that sacredness of that energy. So, kia ora tātou. A little bit different than when you have some opening prayers where you've got to bow the head and everyone has divine. In this sense, we're going to look at it as we are that energy. So absorb that. Be part of the energy within the room. Moye, moye, moye. Moye te tipua. Moye te tawhito. Moye te kahui o ngā ariki. Moye te kahui o ngā taniwha. Tāwhiwhi atu ki ara, tāwhiwhi atu ki ngā tua. Ko rangi nui ki runga. Ko papatua nuku ki raro. Moye, moye, moye te wānanga. Kaupare atu ngā kino o te wā. Kaupare atu ngā hara o te wā. Kia whakawātea te arataka tū. O tāne whakapiripiri. O tāne te waiora. O tāne te ngangana. Kia māma. Kia ngāwari. Kia tau. Tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori oho, te Māori tikiteke. Kia aro nei te hauātanga o te tangata, ki tēnei kaupapa, tēnei te pau o tupu ānuku, tēnei te pau o tupu ārangi, tēnei te pau e aro nei ki te kaupapa e tui nei. Tui, 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 tuia. Tuia i runga. Tuia i raro. Tuia i roto. Tuia i waho. Tuia te hauātanga o te tangata. Ki tōna whānau. Ki tōna hapu. Ki tōna iwi. Ki tōna marae. Ki tōna hāpori. Kia anga whakamua te angitu, te āhurutanga o te tangata, tihei, Māori ora. Kia ora everybody. Well, it's also my pleasure to introduce, there's many important people in this room tonight, but the most important person is the person that's going to keep us all on track. She might sound like she's got a foreign accent. She has. She's a southerner from the South Island. So please, big round of applause for our comp here, our MC, to keep us all rolling along, Susie Ferguson.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Susie Ferguson toko ingoa. A very warm welcome from me to today's Disability Sector election event. I don't think I'm the most important person in the room. I'm about to introduce you to him though. This event, as you can see, is hosted not just by me, but also by IHC New Zealand in partnership with CCS Disability Action, Deaf Aotearoa, Disability Persons Assembly, whoa, watch the mic, Susie, Disability Support Network, and People First New Zealand. The Disability Rights Commissioner, Paula Tesorerio, was unwell today. She was hoping to be here in person. I understand, though, that she is online. I'm going to move the mic. Because I pop like nothing else, eh? She regards today's forum as critical for people to learn how each party plans to create the seismic shift that is needed to improve outcomes for disabled people in New Zealand. So welcome, kia ora to Te Whare Waka. Welcome to everyone who's watching remotely, as well as all the people in the room here. I'm told we have about 130 people, so thank God for level 1 on that. Also, we have around the same number watching online. There's plenty of interest / frustration, perhaps? Does that show? In the audience for this third debate of its kind, there are disabled people, there are their families, their whānau, their friends, their support agencies and networks and human rights organisations. So it is a pretty broad church here, and this, of course, reflects the strength of the sector, also the agreements on priorities for change, which requires political action. Now, I have skin in the game too on this, just, you know, for full disclosure of these things. I've traversed the disability sector in various ways in my time. It is my pleasure to introduce the panel today. I'm going to get them out of order, but I'll do my best. Labour's Greg O'Connor at the end. Jan Logie of the Green Party. We're in green, helpful. Then next we have Erica Harvey, who's representing New Zealand First. We have Simon Court, who is here from ACT, and then Brett Hudson of the National Party on the end here. Now, hopefully all of you up here and in the audience have a copy of the agenda, also a copy of the briefing paper and the 6 highlighted issues. The theme today is that essentially every policy is a disability policy. This has all been prepared as we want to have an informed debate, so we all know what we're talking about, so the politicians know their stuff and have been able to research to speak knowledgeably and with focus. The gauntlet is thrown down. And on that word focus, this is where I do need to introduce you to the most important person in the room. We are timing some of the sections. You will be interrupted by a bell ringing and flag waving for people with visual impairment. And David Corner, here at the front, is going to give a 30-second warning. And he will then be loud and vigorous if you go over time. So please go over time. This is also a very good time to say thank you and kia ora to our sign language interpreters. We have 2 of them here today. Also to say the event is being closed captioned. Please be mindful, politicians, when you speak, and Susie, when you speak, to speak a little bit more slowly so that the sign language interpreters can keep up with you, because I have an awful way of going too fast. So turn around and stare at me if I'm doing that. But this is not an opportunity to talk more slowly so you can think and waffle and pad for time and waste our time. That would be great, thank you. Also, I've got this laptop here in front of me, which means that apparently you can send me questions. Online audience and people in the room can send me questions. They will flash up here. I'll turn it slightly so that the politicians can't see it, because that would be giving the game away, wouldn't it? But certainly we will be able to answer, hopefully, your questions, as well as some of the ones I have. If at all possible, I'm going to try to remember to highlight what section we're doing when we get to the questions, and what section's coming up next, so you can kind of be thinking ahead to get those questions in with any luck. So, here we are, bang on time. It's 4:10. It's time for the politicians to give their response to 3 of those sector priority lists that are in that briefing document. We're going to be doing this alphabetically by their surnames, to be fair. They get 3 minutes each. So first up, kia ora, Simon Court of the ACT Party. We haven't met in person until now. Hello.
Kia ora, Susie.
Kia ora. Just as you get started, why did you want to be here today?
So, I have 3 sons at high school. My youngest son has Down syndrome, so I have personal experience of the challenges that people with disabilities face to get access to education, health services, and to the type of training and development that they will need in their future so that they can have the benefit of work, which is so important for all of our well-being.
Okay, fantastic. Your 3 minutes starts now.
Great. So I've chosen to speak about education, employment and accessibility. So ACT believes in the human rights of all people, and our policies are targeted to make sure that all people have access to the same opportunities. In education, ACT has put up some policy which gives every student a student education account. The reason for that is because so many public schools and your local school do not necessarily serve the interests of people with disabilities and who have access needs and different ways of learning. So what ACT would propose, in addition to giving every student from the age of 2 a $250,000 personalised and portable education account, an account which they could use at any education provider that they choose, and that would last with them for life. We'd also reintroduce charter schools, a program that was abolished by this government, but which we do have the support of the National Party for to reintroduce and put up again. Because ACT believes that for people who have different learning needs, they should be able to choose the type of learning that they want and not be forced to merely accept what the local state school offers them. In terms of employment, we're now in a time of very large and increasing unemployment and underemployment. And some of the rules that this government has put in place to reduce the availability of 90-day trials and to continue to raise the minimum wage at a time when many workers, tens of thousands, are being put out of work, that's going to have much more severe effects on people with disabilities and access needs to get into work. Because if employers have to choose between an employee who is able-bodied, then they may choose that employee rather than somebody with access needs. So what ACT would do is reinstate the 90-day trials for all employers, no matter how large or small, and would also limit any increases in the minimum wage for 3 years to give businesses more certainty about their own costs. When we think about accessibility, many people think about physical accessibility. Now, I'm a construction engineer and I know that it's very difficult to design all environments for all types of access needs. But I certainly believe that our professional bodies and the building and construction industry should be encouraged to adopt best practice. ACT also supports the New Zealand Digital and Web Accessibility Code. Thank you, Susie.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Simon Court there of ACT, who was first up, and I probably should give a quick reminder to switch your phones on silent or flight mode or off or whatever you'd like at this point. Now, next up we have Erica Harvey of New Zealand First. Erica, why did you choose to be here today?
Well, I think you start to become interested in politics when decisions may directly impact your family or someone that you care about. For me, that directly sums up why I've entered into politics. I'm a mother of a child who has autism, and I never thought that when she turned 5 years old that she wouldn't have the right to attend her local school and that we'd have to fight so hard that we have to make sure that she has her basic human rights. So I started becoming an advocate in this space. I'm now the chairperson of a primary school who has the highest number of special needs children in the country. And I'm committed to making a difference, and that is why I've accepted the nomination to stand with New Zealand First.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, your 3 minutes to talk about accessibility, support and education starts now.
So I think if there could be a silver lining to the pandemic, it would be that everyone has now experienced how it feels to have external barriers prevent them from participating in everyday life the way that they'd like to. If these barriers disappeared, essentially, so does the disability. So I want to discuss our plan for accessibility. Using COVID as an example, we're looking at how to improve the provision of a hotline, which could be done in multiple formats, so that those with disability can directly communicate with government, ask questions, and raise concerns. We want to ensure that agencies who are providing disability support and have caregivers have continuity plans. And this could be in case caregivers were unavailable. We recognize that, and I experienced this with my own caregiver, that during the COVID pandemic, there were some people who didn't get their caregivers, and that was a huge issue, so we'd like to shore that up. We'd also like to prioritize protective equipment to make sure that those who are most vulnerable and also the caregivers have priority when it comes to having to dispense masks and things like that. and ensure that caregivers have access to COVID-19 testing alongside other identified priority groups. Another area, as Susie mentioned, that we're focused on is disability support. New Zealand First has committed to changing how disabled people in whānau are supported by working on the planning and design processes that would have Health New Zealand and DHBs working differently than they do today. In Tauranga, where the electorate that I'm standing in, these discussions are happening now, and I'm part of a newly formed advisory group that's looking for ways that we can redesign the current system and move away from the different pockets of funding that we're all fighting over, and bring them together for the benefit of the individual or the family. And of course, this leads me to education, which is a huge interest in mine. And firstly, I'd like to also acknowledge Minister...
1 minute.
1 minute. Minister Martin, for all the inroads that she has done in this area and achieved. We've made a commitment when we're back in government that we will deliver the final tranche of learning support coordinators across New Zealand, introduce health aides into the classroom, and that's to better support kids and students with high and complex needs. Finalize the screening tools for dyslexia, dyspraxia, and mild autism so that these can be picked up earlier and we can start that support much sooner than sometimes it happens now. And there's also, we'd like to oversee the implementation of the Learning Support Registry. This is currently in trial and due to be completed next year. And this piece of work for me is crucial that it happens. And that's because right now we actually do not know as a government how many people and how many schools require the actual accurate data to find out how many children need support. Thank you.
There's the ending. Kia ora, thank you very much. That's Erica Harvey of New Zealand First. Now, next we have Brett Hudson of the National Party. I genuinely had written this little question down for myself before I knew that it was you, Brett. Did you choose to be here or were you told?
Well, I'm here representing not only the National Party, but on behalf of Alfred Naro, who's our spokesperson in this area, and I am the perfect stand-in for Alfred. Alfred is a candidate for us in Te Aratu, which is a suburb where I spent the first 5 years of my life. Alfred and I were both born on the 5th of February. Admittedly, he was a couple of years ahead of me, so I'm delighted to be here as Alfred Mark II.
Fantastic. Your 3 minutes to talk about housing, employment and accessibility is starting now.
Thank you. First, National believes that all New Zealanders deserve every opportunity. That includes people who are differently abled or people that have disabilities. We supported the funding of modifications in homes principally through the Ministry of Health when we were last in government. Well, it's been made clear to us, and we certainly agree, that that process is too slow, too difficult, and we will absolutely undertake work to improve that, to streamline it, and make sure it's both quicker and more responsive. And to that point too, we will undertake a review of all state housing to ensure that it is fit for purpose for all New Zealanders that use it. Fundamentally too, because the housing issue affects all of us to some degree or another, we are committed to simply enabling more homes to be built through RMA reform and other practices that will help to engender that. We will also set a target, because targets focus resource and attention with the Ministry of Social Development to house priority A clients. In employment, the employment levels for people with disabilities even prior to COVID was far lower than we believe it should be. We support the Accessibility Tick program. We support a Business and Disabilities Network. We support the Disability Confident program, which helps employers to understand what people with disabilities can actually add to their businesses. And we absolutely support that businesses are aware of the needs of people with disabilities. Which brings me to accessibility, which I'll do briefly. We support the disability strategy and the implementation of that. In both the previous Parliament and the one that's just concluded, I sat on a select committee that dealt with a number of issues in this area, one of which was learning that accessibility means a great deal, many things to different people. And it is very easy It is very easy to focus on one or two areas and miss the needs of so many people. Similarly, we undertook work in a cross-party manner this most recent term to look at, in sense of democracy, assistance for people with disabilities to actually stand for Parliament and have a fair and equal opportunity of being able to represent their communities in all of New Zealand. And we believe in the cross-party parliamentary group around accessibility legislation and would support that continuum. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you very much. That is Brett Hudson of National there. Now, Greg O'Connor, down the other end of the table, from Labour. Kia ora. Why are you here?
How's your alphabet?
Yeah. Can I not do the alphabet properly?
But that's all right.
Oh.
I'm perfectly happy to
I can do
take
the
my.
alphabet. Oh, there you go.
Well, it's
Do you
probably
know,
like.
one of my issues is my own things is I switch letters and numbers round. I also have to repeat people's phone numbers back to them because I switch them round.
Well,
There you go.
Well, I'm only too happy to.
You can go next anyway.
To help. Thank you. I'm Greg O'Connor. I'm here like the previous speakers. I have a autistic and intellectually disabled son who's now 27, and I've been relatively heavily involved in the disability sector for some coming up for about 25 years now. As a result of that, I'm here. Grant Robertson actually was originally invited. He asked me to come because of my background in this. This is an area that, as we all take our various experiences to Parliament, really the opportunity to use the sum total of our life's experience and apply them not necessarily to tight policies, but to everything, so that across the board, when any issue is arising, you're bringing that voice of disability to that debate.
Okay.
And that's something that I believe is I'm able to, and why I'm here.
Fantastic. So you are here to talk about education, employment and support, and you've got 3 minutes, and it starts now.
Yes, well, I'll start with the education. And look, we all, as we sort of go through the education system, have a relearn and our aspirations sort of change along the way. And I could just show something happened with my son just recently, and it's always understanding where you're going and what success looks like. And something happened. My son did this design recently on a T-shirt, and it's been picked up by someone who really does know their art. And he'd been doing those sort of drawings for some time, and finally he sort of got into a system where the things he was good at, the things that actually put him almost in our world, because when I held that up, you all sort of understand that was art. And he actually, I know it may sound, but some of you may understand, he almost arrived in, I suppose, our world, or more importantly, we probably arrived in his. And so any education system and any policies, I know we use a lot of sort of, I suppose, different words around this, but it's understanding what success looks like. And I'll just go into the details, okay? That's sort of a little bit highfalutin. You know, how do you make these things happen? Around sort of inclusive education for all learners. And this is, again, another quote. We want every child, no matter who they are or where they have come from, to have the opportunity to fulfil their potential and live life to the fullest. And I'd read that before, and until I understand, I suppose it was a bit of a moment when I saw that design and saw that T-shirt. I understand living life to the fullest, what it means. It means, you know, accepting that we won't all have the same ability to achieve, but any system we have in place has got to ensure that we are going to maximise the opportunities and abilities of every person and every child right through education. So I've sort of stuck on education, but if I can just briefly, in the probably 30 seconds left to me, also move on to employment, because again, that vision thing, I think it was George Bush said, is about, you know, what can, and I'm sorry to relate this back to my son, but when we're looking at policies, I think it's useful to have someone in mind and makes the policies that much more effective. I always saw, what will my son do? Can he be a supermarket trolley? Will he ever have the ability to be someone who can bring the supermarket trolleys in? Now, I know that sounds, but that was my aspiration and for him. And so that means working with employers. And I know that in my electorate, some of particularly the supermarket owners are very, very good at making sure that they do help in maximising that. So the most important thing in our employment policy is with employers, to understanding them and subsidising them, how they can actually help maximise that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, you got a good ring of the bell there. Good on you.
I'm only doing it quietly so far.
Oh, you can do it as loud as you like. Now, last, and my apologies, because everybody knows that L comes after O, Jan Logie of the Green Party. I should ask you, though, how much of this is your thing? We've heard a lot of people with kind of personal connections in the room. What's your thing for being here?
I think for me, for a long time, it's come from a position of actually just having a fundamental belief that we're all better off when we're all able to participate, and a real sense of frustration at the injustice that I've seen from the locking out of people with disabilities from participating. But I also now, more recently, have experience of a stepdaughter whose learning needs have not been met through our school system, and the battle to try and support her to feel great about herself and the amazing young woman that she is. Yeah, probably universal, right?
Okay, well, maybe. Actually, that would be interesting to find out at this stage. How many people here, just as a kind of show of hands perhaps, would say that the education system has not met their needs or their children's needs, or that you perhaps characterise it as a battle at points? That's pretty much, well,
Vote unanimous on that one.
it looks like a 3/4 or thereabouts show of hands. Jan, your 3 minutes though, nonetheless. Start now.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Jan Logie ahau. And so I'm focusing on housing, welfare reform and accessibility, and I'll try and go to details so you get more information in the 3 minutes. It'll be a challenge, to be honest. The Greens see housing as a human right. And in this election, we're taking two key areas in housing that we're focusing on to be able to deliver that human right to appropriate housing. So one of them is progressively increasing the accessibility of new homes within the Crown Home Build program, and changing the building code so that all houses are accessible by type. So it would be, for example, all one-storey houses should be fully accessible. 4-storey houses should also all be accessible. 2 and 3, we may need some of them, and we may not be able to afford to put lifts in, but if that's going to be the case, ground floor should be accessible, and there should be common space. Because the 15% target at the moment is just appalling, to be frank. It's one thing to have a house to live in, but not to be able to visit any other person is just not meeting our human rights obligations. So that's what we're pushing in this election. Secondly, on welfare, we recognise that to participate in society, in a society where we have embedded discrimination in employment and many long effects around the failure of our education system, people will be locked out of employment for a period of time. And we cannot punish them by forcing them into poverty. And that is what our current welfare system does. So we have a policy this election of immediately rolling together job seeker, disability, sickness and supported living into one payment, and increasing it to $390 a week in the first year, and fully individualising those payments, and then progressively, when we've done it, bringing it into ACC to remove the discrimination between people with disabilities from accident or birth or sickness. And then phase 2 is accessibility. You'll see a signal of our commitment in our easy read policy on your chair, which I'm so stoked about. But also it's actually about bringing in the Accessibility Act, and I'm going too fast and not demonstrating any accessibility at all. but it's also accessible public transport so people can move around, and repair, central government taking control of repair of footpaths rather than leaving it to local government, who often doesn't prioritise it, and it limits people's mobility.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Jan. Jan Logie of the Green Party there. Now, just before we get on to questions from the floor, questions from those of you who are watching at home, I've got a few bits and pieces that I would like to ask, but the first topic, if you want to get your questions in, that I'll go to after this, is education. So if you're wanting to ask a question to anybody on education, let me know. There are microphones, I think, in the room as well that are roving around, so you can just put your hand up at the right point, and I can see they're already beginning to come in. That's great. So just to ask a few questions, I guess, from perhaps what some of you said in those opening statements. Simon, if I can come back to you, Simon Court of Act, you talked about wanting the same opportunities, everyone to be able to have the same opportunities. But considering the austerity that Act is putting forward, when you say opportunity, do you just mean that the same stuff will be taken away from everyone, so your baseline will get lower?
Well, Susie, ACT is not promoting austerity, but clearly we're living in a time where a government feels it doesn't have to evaluate the benefits associated with some of the costs it's incurring. They've suspended the regulatory impact assessments, the most basic tool, to assess whether the services they're proposing to deliver are actually going to be effective. We don't need money being hosed at us. We don't need more announcements. What ACT believes is actually that the sector, the disability sector in this case, and the communities that they serve are best placed to identify their needs and the solutions which will deliver the outcomes they're seeking.
Okay, so just to be clear on that, ACT does not believe that there should be extra funding put towards the disability sector.
No, that's not correct at all. That's
Okay,
not accurate.
I misunderstand you.
So, you know, what we do want to do, though, is open up the opportunities for people with disabilities to enjoy and benefit from employment. We have heard much about the reform of the tertiary sector, and we know that fully abled students from the wealthiest homes in New Zealand have also benefited from the free student loans, your first year tertiary free, but that's done nothing to address the needs of young people with disabilities and access needs who've left school, gone into training, then are struggling to find meaningful work. So ACT actually has a proposal to address that. What we want to do is direct a lot of the funding that's currently going to institutions to SMEs, to small to medium businesses, to help them take on more apprentices and cadets, particularly those ones who struggle to get into work. We know that the health and safety compliance obligations, particularly around people who have disabilities or have low vision or who are hearing impaired, it's much more, feels more risky to an employer to take somebody like that on compared to an able-bodied worker. And so what ACT wants to do,
does that
Susie,
amount to corporate welfare, though?
it doesn't sound like corporate welfare to me.
Well, giving money to businesses
well,
from the
there's enough.
government.
So if you're talking about cadetships, you're talking about apprenticeships, it wasn't that long ago. In fact, when I left school, I went to Unitec, which is a place where you used to do vocational education, and in my case it was civil engineering. But at that time, before that time, employers were in fact offered a training grant to take on apprentices because it was recognised it took some years in cases to get those young people or those new workers up to speed. And ACT believes that a lot of the funding that's been directed towards institutions should in fact go to employers who are delivering at least half the training in their workplaces.
Okay, just quickly, one more question on the reinstating of the 90-day limit. Is that not potentially something where an employer could get some funding from you, take on somebody, and then fire them or lay them off on day 89?
Well, look, in the case that an employer applied to take a worker on into a scheme and that worker turned out to be unsuitable, or the person themselves decided that despite what they thought on day one, actually that wasn't for them. And I can tell you, Susie, I've had a job working at a garden centre. After a couple of days in the hot sun, I decided that I'd prefer to go and do something else, and that as a 15-year-old. Now, I'm sure that employers should not be held to maintain that offer of employment to everybody who puts their hand up for a job. But when it comes to to people with disabilities and who have different access needs, then employers should actually have a lot more flexibility, and we think that should apply to all workers in all workplaces.
How does that help the dignity of disabled people?
So I think that people actually get dignity through work. Their well-being and their mental health is much improved through work. So reducing the barriers to employment...
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about, though, because if they're laid off on day 89, then they're not in work.
So look, I'm sure that that employers are not going to be taking people on and then deciding on day 89 to lay them off unless there is a genuine reason to do so.
What would be there to stop them, though?
I guess that's the purpose of the 90-day trial. It reduces the risk to employers and makes it much easier for people who might not otherwise be attractive to employers to get a job. And we just have to accept that with 80 to 100,000 people already having lost their job in the past few months, and forecast that another 100,000 able-bodied workers may also be laid off, that there is going to be huge competition for a far reduced number of jobs. So ACT believes that it's important that we reintroduce the 90-day trial. We think there are clear demonstrated benefits to that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Simon Court of ACT there. Erica Harvey, if I can come along to you. You were obviously talking about I guess a bunch of stuff, including PPE, which I think we'll get onto slightly later. But how would New Zealand First make every policy a disability policy? How would you put the lens across it?
Well, this parliamentary term, every cabinet paper actually has a disability perspective, and that helps us now to ensure that a universally accessible New Zealand, and we're moving forward to make sure that all people are involved in that. That hasn't happened before, and so we're going to continue with that. I mean, what New Zealand First is really good about is being quite practical, having the discussions that matter, pulling people around the table, organizations, disabled people, people like myself who have firsthand experience on the ground, and kind of working together to find those solutions to ensure that we don't go backwards from where we have come. We've come such a long way, especially if we look at the strides we've made in education, the investment that's been made, understanding, the accessibility and how important that is for everyone. New Zealand First was quite committed there.
Okay, I appreciate you're not an MP, you're not around the cabinet table, but to your, and I'm not meaning that by throwing shade, I'm not trying to do that at all.
You can throw shade.
Do you, no, that's not. But, is there, or has there been, before this disability lens was being put across policy, were people with disabilities an afterthought, getting a raw deal, as you see it?
As my personal thought is that disability has been getting a raw deal for quite a long time. It's a systemic issue that's happened for many years, many governments. But I think where we have come is that now with New Zealand First and in coalition with Labour and the Greens, we've made some positive strides forward. There's been investment that has never happened within the disability sector, and we're continued to do that. We recognise that we want a more inclusive society. We don't want to just talk about it. We want to actually put that into action, and that's what we've been focused on doing, and we want to continue to do that.
One thing about you were talking about learning support for children with high and complex needs and being able to do more in that space, and I know that Tracy Marston has announced an awful lot of money and policy around this. I'm interested, though, that this is for children who've already been identified as having disabilities. Some of them are visible, some of them are invisible. My own personal experience in this sector is that the thing that's difficult is getting the diagnosis. Where's the money for diagnosis? Because it's all very well to have money for teacher aids and for children with autism and making things available as different classroom aids. That's fantastic. But if children are not being identified, and believe me, they're not, all the money in the world doesn't make any difference to that if you don't know which kids need it.
Yep, so that's part of the thing I discussed was around those, we're finalizing a screening tool. So there is a screening tool that's currently in pilot right now in different schools, and that's to identify those, with different types of learning needs. A lot of times right now, as many of you will know, is the identification really comes from the schools who are really committed to ensuring inclusion happens. And if you don't have a school like that, you're correct, and those kids fall through the cracks. So those screening tools are quite crucial. It will be vital in improving our education system, and we have the pilot out. We're ready to roll it out at the beginning of next year, and that will identify, how many children do need some sort of learning support. And that's so when you hear these funding announcements that come and they say, oh, we've got $3 billion and it feels like it doesn't hit where it counts. The reason it doesn't hit is because we aren't identifying properly as a government where that money needs to go, and that's what we're trying to fix with New Zealand First.
Thank you very much, Erica Harvey of New Zealand First there. Brett Hudson, if I can come to you, you were talking about housing a lot and the fit-for-purpose houses. What percentage do you think is a reasonable number or reasonable proportion to be accessible and, in a realistic time frame, in the next 3 years, in a short time frame?
Well, I don't know that there's a threshold where a certain amount of people should miss out. The purpose of our review is to review every state house to ensure that every one of them is fit for purpose for the tenants. Now, of course, it takes time, but we're not saying that X% of people should miss out for a period of time.
But when you say fit for purpose, for the tenants, I guess the tenants may change. So does that mean that there's going to be essentially a disability lens put across the state housing sector of the country? Should there be another national government in a few weeks' time?
Well, I would certainly have an expectation. I think all New Zealanders would have an expectation that where people are being housed, that Housing New Zealand are indeed, or Kāinga Ora, are indeed looking at the needs of that new tenant and ensuring that they are going into the right house or that the house is modified for their needs.
Do you agree, you were talking as well about employment, do you agree with ACT that the 90-day trial should be brought back in?
We do support a 90-day trial, and I've got employers in Ohara who have said to me that that now allows them to take risks, and not necessarily risks people with differently abled people, but risks on people that they wouldn't otherwise choose to employ. Now, for our subsidisation, our Job Start proposal, that full subsidy isn't paid until after 90 days because we recognise the potential risk that an employer, it would only be a very bad employer that would do that, and legislation doesn't suddenly make them
I was going to say, isn't that illegal though, because discrimination and all that?
Sorry?
Discrimination? You're not allowed to discriminate. If you've got the best candidate for the job, you shouldn't be like, oh, I don't want to employ them because they're disabled.
Well, I think you'd look at a situation like that where some people might simply choose not to assess certain characteristics. For instance, and this is just one example, there could be others, it could adversely affect people who have served custodial sentences, and that they might be less considered than other candidates. And I have had employers say that they believe, they hold that they're prepared to take risks when they've got that potential protection.
Is risk the right word when we're talking about
well, if you look at the impact on their business, if they make a bad choice, and there is a real potential that a candidate can present well at the one or two interviews they might have, but if they make a choice that turns out to have been one that they would regret, that if they have employment law that makes it very difficult for them to rectify that situation, then they will take a more risk-averse position in the first place, which means that some people are less likely to gain employment.
Do you think employers are clued up enough about perhaps what disabled people have to offer? Because it's sort of, the way you're talking sort of makes me think that everyone is sort of being put in this one box and and sort of being seen as not employable, not valuable.
No, the answer to that is no, I do not believe they are, and that's why we support the Disability Confident Program. I think that people with disabilities are not the only example, but I don't think enough businesses do understand the value that they would receive from a hugely motivated and committed worker.
Greg, I'm going to come to you just because, You spoke you spoke first because I can't do the alphabet. You talked about your son and his T-shirt that he has designed. But you talked about disabled people being in our world. And I was interested in your language there about, it sort of made me think that are there separate worlds, and how easy is it to traverse between the two? And we hear a lot about, you know, the Pākehā world and Te Ao Māori. Do we also have more bridges that we need to build between the able-bodied, the non-disability world and the world that's inhabited by people with disabilities? Are we ghettoising, I suppose I'm trying to say?
Yeah, there's two levels you can take that at. It's the personal level, and again, everyone here who has been involved with someone with disability will know you've got to take time as individuals to understand. I mean, the only reason I brought that is that that was an eye-opening moment to realise that what potential meant. That was actually what I understood. But translating, given we're here for a the policy session, translating that into a policy that we can all parties here have sat here and spoken about, we will put these things in place, and therefore if we put this in place, therefore this will happen. What's really important is to understand what this is, and what success is, and it will be for every person here. And I know this sounds a bit esoteric, but you'll put you can spend all sorts of money, you can have all sorts of initiatives in place, but unless you really understand what it is that the individual, and it's always about the individual, can achieve, then really we'll be ticking the box all along the way, and have targets and all sorts of other things without ever really achieving what we want to.
How much political will has the government over the last 3 years really had in this space?
Actually, I would judge it by the number of times, and probably it brings it up in our caucus, where these discussions, or when there is a matter being discussed and someone like Carmel Cepoloni will actually bring it up as, well, hold on, how is this going to affect this particular group? And look, there's a Health and Disability Commissioner, and again, a few of the speakers have talked about the need to ensure that when a policy is being considered, then you actually have this lens across it. But I think that's quite effective to make sure that there is this lens in there. But again, a lens by itself is not enough unless you know what success looks like in there. And that's what we have a look. I didn't actually go through the details. I've got some policy stuff here we can go through.
Yeah.
But all of that, again, like each party has. But until we know what that success looks like.
Okay.
I keep going back to that.
I'm slightly squeezed myself on time, which is entirely my fault. But Jan Logie, I'd love to come to you. You have talked about how people are living in homes that are not adequate, they're not good enough. What you say, the 15% target accessibility is appalling. So what's good enough?
Well, I think that's our point, is we're not at a place to put a hard target on it, but the description of it is, for us, that all single-storey places are fully accessible, all 4-storey or more are fully accessible, and 2 and 3 where there's the affordability issue. So that, for us, is actually just getting by the type of housing, working out what's affordable and accessible, but accommodating for those 2 and 3, that there is common space, so that we are not putting walls up between people's ability to move and connect with others.
But realistically, you know, it's a post-COVID world, money is tight. How realistic is it that you could get that up from 15%? I mean, that's the target. I don't, off the top of my head, happen to know what the actuality of that is. But if the 15% is the target, how would you get it up to 20, 25% over the next 3 years? Wouldn't that cost a bomb?
Well, it's actually just about the design, right?
But existing houses, though?
No, this is about the new state
builds.
house builds and the building code, and then there's extra work that needs to be done around remediation, and that's true. But we're prioritising the new build because there's so many more new houses that need to be built, and that is our initial focus.
Okay. I'm going to move to the education section now, which there are some questions that have, coming on. Let me just make sure I get these right. Okay. I'm just going to start, and I'm going to be slightly mean here because you obviously elected to speak on 3 issues, but I'm going to mainly ask questions around the ones that you haven't. So Brett, on education, what mark out of 10 would you give the report card on how inclusive our education system is for people with disabilities and why?
I don't know that I'm in a position to give it a mark, but I know there's.
Well, you are here though.
I
So
know it's a lot more than
it's
we
an
need
opportunity.
to do. And it's an opportunity to take a swipe at a current government, but I'm not going to take that opportunity.
Well, you can.
What I am going to say is that we have announced some real policies to make a difference. Yes, they are policies about more learning support, more teacher aid hours, but also an accelerated before school check for 3-year-olds, so that we can identify particular disabilities, whether they're behavioural, intellectual, prior to school, so that action can be taken early.
Jan, again, this is not a section that you wanted to talk about, but what do you think in terms of education gets the attention and what languages? I suppose I'm more interested in what languages. What do you think isn't seen in the education system?
Well, actually, I think there's quite a bit of agreement on this, actually. I think that early assessment and making sure that there's also support guaranteed to meet the issues identified in the assessment, because we haven't got there yet, right? And there's the SENCOs and the second wave of that, and more teacher aids and an increase in OARS funding. And I think it really is, there's a lot of work to be done.
There is a lot of work to be done.
Started,
Brett, on diagnosis of, I brought this up a little bit earlier, that diagnosis is often the first hurdle that people don't get over that hurdle, so they don't get access, the doors do not open. Would National put money dedicated into whatever format you see that as being, whether it's through the RTLB in schools, whether it's for individual people that they could apply for it, would you put money up front so that people could seek diagnoses?
Well, we're certainly putting money up front with that accelerated check at age 3. We've also committed, particularly for potentially at-risk children's, a payment or subsidy for the first 1,000 days for appropriate services, so up to $6,000.
What are the extra bits in the check?
Sorry?
What are the extra bits in the enhanced check that you're saying for 3-year-olds?
I'm saying that it's bringing it forward so that the diagnosis can be made at an earlier age rather than potentially once
How many do you think are
either
picked
in
up at?
ECE or in school.
How many are picked up at the stage 4 check?
I don't have that statistics.
But just from personal experience, my son was passed with flying colours. So he didn't get picked up. So if you'd done him at 3, you probably would have had less chance, wouldn't you, than more?
But then he would also have been captured then upon reaching school. So this is an additional thing, not a replacement.
We had to pay lots of money to get his diagnosis. This is the point.
Well,
you have to pay thousands of dollars to get the diagnoses. And then the doors open.
But the practicality or the purpose of the accelerated check at 3 is to capture more children ahead of time. Now, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll capture everyone, but it is certainly better than leaving things at the status quo.
Okay. Some questions that we've got coming in here, which is fantastic. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question on the floor? Yes, over here. Just hang on a sec. Someone with a microphone will come your way. I'll do it. Oh, thank you. Here we go.
Right, guys, are you ready for this one?
No.
If you're elected, how would you remind able-bodied people and police the law against the discrimination of the disabled?
Okay, let's start.
Your 3 minutes.
No. Maybe if you're lucky, 15 seconds. Greg O'Connor starts now. A little bit longer than that, maybe.
Well, I think everyone here, or everyone agrees that there is any discrimination against someone for disability is probably one of the worst things you can do. People who can't, for whatever reason, defend themselves. There's some discussion you might be aware of around hate speech, which will certainly ensure that, I suppose, use of humour and disparaging discussion on people, around people because of their disability. That's one thing. I don't. It's not necessarily designed there, but that was one thing that will be a factor.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep this quite tight. Simon Court, I'm going to come to you from ACT.
Thank you. So I think it's important that we celebrate and promote the achievements of people who have disabilities. So if I'm elected and I'm an MP, I'll keep doing some of the things that I've enjoyed doing. I was a project manager and organiser for the Buddy Walk event, which is like a big day out for kids with Down syndrome and their families, and make sure that in the groups that I deal with that help young people into work, that I can champion the success of those people when I speak in Parliament, and if I have the opportunity to speak to others, to able-bodied people who need to be reminded that we should all have the benefit of being able to enjoy work for our well-being.
Erica Harvey.
Well, for me, only your environment really truly makes you disabled. So if we can change that, we're starting to make progress anyway. So that's why accessibility, I think, is really important. The other thing that's really important is awareness. So raising awareness. For so long, I think there has been this misconception that disabled people don't add value like able-bodied people, and that's not true. I've seen some and met some amazing people in my life that I have come to be really close friends with, and I think it's about raising awareness and really ensuring that accessibility so that we all are on the, same playing field.
Jan Logie of the Greens.
So I think there's a lot we have to do. So one of them is that government needs to take leadership in actually challenging discrimination, and we need our policies to not be discriminatory. And so like the 90-day rules to enable employers to discriminate against groups by firing people legally is not helpful in celebrating people. So it's about resourcing our disabled people's organisations to be able to be champions for change, about upholding the United Nations Convention and resourcing the Human Rights Commission to be there to intervene and challenge individual acts. But it's the individual we have to challenge, but also make sure that the whole system, we remove discrimination, and as politicians, we make sure that we eliminate that from our work.
And finally, Brett Hudson.
I think that we can start by modelling positive behaviours and language around people with disabilities. We are enormously proud, actually, of the Enabling Good Lives program, a program that was created with and alongside members of the disabled community. Why we support the idea of disability confident and promoting the needs of people in employment. We need to focus on what people can do instead of talking about perhaps what they can't.
Okay, this is a question that I've got on the screen in front of me, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask the question, and then I'm literally going to go down the line from Greg to Brett, and it's a yes or no. No shilly-shallying, no, oh, but, maybe, no, yes or no. So here's the question. Is the future of education about expanding the specialist school network and ORS funding so more students can access the services, or is it about better resourcing state schools to support students with disabilities alongside their peers? Yes or which one is it? Specialist school or state school? There are your two answers, specialist or state. Greg? In 3, 2,
I'm
1.
looking at my experience. And look, it's not a yes/no question. I'm sorry,
It is.
it's not.
It
It's
is.
not a yes/no
It's
question.
a yes/no question.
It is not. You may have asked the question because to do that
Okay,
is to say
Jan Logie,
fund,
what do you
fund
think?
holding schools.
Jan Logie, what do you
Back to
think?
fund holding schools.
State schools or specialist schools?
Primarily state, but cultural
What?
specialist.
Yeah. Erica
Okay.
Harvey.
We need to better resource the schools that we have.
Simon Courts.
Specialist charter schools. Choice.
Not an option, actually.
Sure
Brett, on here. Brett Hudson.
I'm with Jan on this one, primarily state schools, but we've got to be
Okay.
open to some specific.
Okay. Why is it that it's so hard to just use 2 words instead of 10? Here's another question here.
Yeah, that's
I might do this by...
The reason that was
we've
difficult. What about
moved
school for the
on,
deaf?
Greg. We've
What
moved
about
on.
school
We've
for the
moved
deaf?
on, Greg.
Yeah.
No, I'm
The
sorry.
next question.
I'm sorry. What about
Ooh.
schools for the deaf?
The next question.
No, you can't say yes/no question. It's very unfair. Yeah. So, and I just
Okay.
think you've got to be very careful.
Now-
That's why nothing ever gets done.
So, what do you think? What school for the deaf should? That doesn't come into your question, does it?
Okay. Well, to be fair, it's not my question. It's a question from an online audience member who is watching you, and that's their question. I'm asking their question. I'm your facilitator. It's not my question. But I think it's a good question, because it's got you going, eh? Now, which parties, and I think I might do this one as a show of hands, which I will then describe to the audience. Which parties would roll out more funding for education support worker hours for individuals within ECE and schools? Yes, raise your hands.
rule.
That's ACT.
Rule out.
Oh, no, it's just disappeared. Can it come back? I will do, if it comes back. Oh, no. Oh, it's maybe coming back. Maybe? Yes or no? Do we know if it can come back? I think it was along the lines, and forgive me if I get the wrong end of the stick on this, who would give more support hours for workers at ECE and schools and throw more money at it? Oh, here we go. Which parties will roll out more funding for the hours for individuals within ECE and schools?
What exactly?
Who would rule out?
Who would rule it out?
Roll out.
Oh.
Give.
Roll.
Give it.
Roll. My R's, like I'm from Gore.
Yeah, we'll
You
roll.
would give more money for more workers' time.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a yes from Greg O'Connor, yes from Jan Logie, a yes from Erica Harvey, it's everybody. Oh, that's nice.
I hope Nicola Wallace agrees with you.
Here's another one that we've got here. Sorry, I'm whispering to myself now. I'm wondering how to add that. Will the Education Department move from making suggestions for schools to be inclusive to actual legislation that protects disabled students' rights? Does there need to be more legislation around this? Brett Hudson.
Well, as I said, I support the cross-party group, which is about accessibility legislation. So I don't know whether, I personally don't know whether that needs answer, but I think it's the right forum to progress that.
Okay.
And if it does, then the answer would be yes.
Simon Court.
Look, I haven't had the opportunity to be a part of any cross-party groups in Parliament yet. ACT certainly believes that the sector-led and community-led innovation is more likely to lead to the right answers than government Wellington written regulation.
Thank you very much. Erica Harvey.
Well, yes, definitely legislation needs to happen because so many schools are creatively excluding children that we need to ensure this doesn't happen anymore. So that definitely needs to stop.
Jan Logie.
Agree, and also agree with Brett that the Accessibility Act seems like a really good way in terms of being enforceable with timeframes.
And Greg O'Connor.
Sadly, it does need a legislative base.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, let's see, is there another question on the floor here? Yes, there is one at the back. Just hang on a minute for the microphone, it's coming. And we'll be moving, just to say, in terms of thinking about the next section we're going to talk about, the next one is housing. So if you want to start putting housing questions in or start thinking about that, that would be great. Yes, Kia ora.
I understand the abortion law passed this year allows children to be killed if they are not the sex their parents want or have a disability,
I'm not sure
such
that's-
as Down syndrome. It was a conscience vote. What are your positions on the issue?
Is this about education?
It's about welfare. It's about disability rights.
Indeed it is, and we are going to come on to that later, but I'm going to say, can we hold that thought, because I am going to talk about this a little bit later on, because at the moment we're on education stuff. Here is one saying, oh, it's an interesting one. Why isn't a school's culture of inclusion and delivery of inclusive education programmes routinely part of ERO reporting? Should that be brought in? Yes or no, Brett Hudson?
Yes.
Simon Court?
Yes.
Erica Harvey?
Absolutely.
Dan Logie?
No brainer.
And Greg
Absolutely,
O'Connor?
yes.
Well, that's easy, isn't it? There we go. Right. Is there any other question from the floor on education? Oh, yes, we do. We have a couple down here. Hang on for the mic. It's on its way. Oh, I'll go to... Yes, I'll go to you first.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So I'm a mother of 2 children with disabilities. We talk a lot about inclusion, but to us it's a fairy tale. The reality is, in our lives, that our children are made out to be problematic in the school system. They are unwelcomed. They're looked at as a burden with a big price tag, and there's a lot of child blaming and a lot of parent blaming. In our experience, there's been a huge lack of understanding. Sorry?
What would you like to ask?
Yep, it's coming.
Yeah.
I just want to explain where I'm coming from. And a lot of unwillingness from the teacher's part, but that comes from overworked teachers. There's a lot going on in the school system as well, and we understand that. But there is a culture of bias. There's no accountability, and there's no way that we can get natural justice in the school system. Now, coming to my question, I don't think that this system is nothing short of a system of discrimination and exclusion to us. And there's no other group of people that is treated like this in this day and age in 2020. No other group. So I'm not sure why the government is accepting this. We put in over $600 million of funding, and that got swallowed up in the system and swallowed up in lending support coordinators, and it didn't touch the ground with our children at all. What transformational change are you going to make?
Greg O'Connor.
No, this is why I was reluctant to answer yes or no to that question, because what I'd like to see discussion, and I'd be interested to see your views. My son, being older, grew up in the fund-holding school scenario, where there would be one school, for those who don't know, there'd be one school basically in an area where those with special needs would go to. And to me, and that was the system that I knew, versus now where every child has got right to every school. And I'd like to see a discussion in that area to see which way. And look, I'll be honest. I'll be honest. I liked the fund-holding school because I think there was much that worked better for the families, and it worked better, in my experience, for the pupil or the student.
Jan Logie.
The Green Party absolutely support mainstreaming. We don't want divisions between children. We want everyone to learn to know each other and love our diversity, while recognising the place for some, like the, cultural, like kohanga, deaf school, similar thing to my mind. So for us, it's recognising the size of the problem in the first instance, recognising, doing that second wave, continuing the work that has been started, and I get that it hasn't touched the ground yet, that's that first wave. There has to be a commitment to the second wave for the learning support. There needs to be more teacher aid hours, and it's been great to see the pay equity for them, which includes more professional development to enable them to be doing that job really well, and the OARS funding. But also, as an example, we do need more to be bringing together, and the Greens got the use of force out of the Education Act. in recognition, and that there be guidelines developed with whānau and teachers to be able to support everyone to be safe within the schools.
Okay.
And we have to bring people together to do the work.
Erica Harvey.
So I understand what you're saying 100%. As the chairman of our school, we have to fund a lot of the children that have needs who didn't get funding from any government previously until now that we're making progress. And so we run at a deficit of over $100,000 for pulling that funding out of our operational budget. So I think that universal screening tool is important because then we can identify which kids and which schools have the needs, and we can make sure that that money hits exactly where it needs to go, and that starts to create the equity that we're all looking for. Two, the funding model, it needs to change. It promotes exclusion. So if you creatively exclude a child, you'll have a decile 10 that has $100,000 in their bank, and like my school, a decile 2 who's negative 200 grand. So we've got to fix the way that that model works. And thirdly, I think it's about training the teachers, resourcing them adequately, and really working with them as a parent. It's also in the home and in the school.
Thank you very much. Simon Court.
Your question brought back so many emotions and feelings for me. My experience in getting my son the support that he needed when he started primary school was very difficult. Despite the well-meaning and loving teacher aides that worked with him in the classroom, what as we found as parents was that he was failing in his numeracy and literacy goals. His ability to reach his potential was being missed at every turn. And so reluctantly, we took a choice as parents to have my son attend a base school for a couple of years to prepare him with his, for learning, but also for his better behaviours to go into high school. And now he attends the same high school as his big brothers. And they're quite happy to have little brother at high school. And I guess that shows me that what's most important is that you've got to have choice, because every family and every child has different needs. And despite my commitment to having my son attend a mainstream school with his siblings, it just didn't work out for him. And so ACT would advocate choice.
Thank you very much. Brett Hudson.
So we've announced a $160 million per year fund for to support children with learning difficulties. Now that fund will be allocated based on need, and it will be the school communities that get to determine what their funding is spent on, because they best know the needs they have for the children they have. We've also announced about $150 million for additional teacher aid hours, an average of 600 per school. So help with a bit of the resourcing challenges, and you yourself noted that there are teachers there that would love to do better, but they themselves have pressures that we can help to relieve.
Any further questions? One last one on education before we move on to housing. And I've got a quiz on housing, you'll be pleased to know. I love a quiz. Kia ora.
Kia ora, hi. I'm the mum of 2 special needs children as well. Absolutely want to echo, where? Down here? Up there? Want to echo the lady over here, what she said. Gave her a clap, well said. One of the things that the words have been coming out is those 2 words, cross-party. I've witnessed decades through my own family and extended family of people kids falling through, not cracks, but canyons. And these kids invariably end up a burden on society because they go to rehab, they go to prison, they get a drug habit, an alcohol habit, they are on benefits. I think this is obvious, but I'm stating the obvious because it needs to be stated. With a little bit of investment in the future, looking ahead, these children can contribute. The children I'm talking about are kids, all policies weren't written with these kids in mind. They are kids that have behavioural challenges because of neurological conditions, ASD, ADHD. Pathological demand avoidance is one that's coming up a lot lately, that is getting a big barrier for bright kids they fall off the end of the education system and fall into our correctional system or something similar, our welfare system. It doesn't have to happen. They're bright kids. The training needs to happen. It's not just funding. They need training. The teachers are screaming out for it. I guess my question is, and it's a tough one, but it needs to be asked, cross-party, what do any of you intend to make that a big part of your thrust with your education, whatever you intend to deliver? It needs to be cross-party. It needs to be long-term. A 3-year government doesn't cut it, and it hasn't done for decades. And it's not going to change with all of your policies and funding and everything else. Nothing will change if we don't commit to cross-party, long-term investment in these kids to stop them being a drain on society down the track and to actually become contributors. It's a no-brainer.
So I guess, can we ask who, and maybe this is a show of hands, who would pledge that should they be in the next government, they would actively work to get cross-party support on disability issues in the education space? Who would do it? They're all I know, but I'm talking about, we're talking about education right now. So in terms of education, you're pledging, all of you, that you will work cross-party to make this work. If it's quick.
It is. It's quick. I think that every party up here wants to solve this issue. It's the approach that gets it, is why we go forward and go backwards, is that we all have a different approach. So I think you're correct. If cross-party, if we can all agree and work together and find a compromised middle ground, it'd be great.
Okay.
Susie, can I offer a quick perspective on that?
Oh,
because
once you say yes to one of you.
I think it's important though, because it's all very well to say we have cross-party support, but we don't want to agree on the lowest common denominator. We actually want to provide for opportunity and for young people to reach their potential. And I'll just make a point. When this government came in, they cancelled charter schools and partnership schools where the most vulnerable kids.
Oh, it's lovely being shouted down.
But Susie,
I'm asking you a question.
we can't have governments coming and cancelling programs.
Sorry, Susie.
Pledge to be cross-party and pledge to be ambitious in this space. Who can pledge for that? All right, show of hands. Good on you, all of you.
Susie, on cross-party, there is a cross-party.
No, I'm not having any more. I'm really sorry, Greg. We have to move on.
There already is a cross-party committee. I just want to reassure you.
Thank you. We're going to be here till 10 o'clock at night, and my bedtime is before then, so I'll be asleep. Right. Now, let's talk about housing. Here's a quick quiz, and it's going to be done on guesses, and you can kind of shout them out. We know disabled people are more likely to rent. So how many wheelchair accessible rentals do you think there are available in New Zealand today? I'm going to give you a clue. I went on Trade Me this morning. The starting point of how many rentals are available across the whole country today has Trade Me has 8,871 total rentals. So how many rentals do you think are wheelchair accessible today in New Zealand? Greg, what do you reckon? Pick a number.
It would be probably 2 figures. I'd say 42.
Okay, so you say, I'm going to keep a tally. 42. Greg says 42. Jan, what do you say?
I have no idea. I'm going to go for 37.
37. Erica?
7.
7. Simon?
I'd say no more than 20.
So I'll say 20 on that one. And Brett?
Well, I want to be the optimist, so I'm going to say 110.
110? You're all wrong. Who's the closest? Let me see if I can quickly work it out. I think, with my dodgy maths as good as my dodgy dodgy alphabet, I think, Erica, you're the closest. 13 is the number. 13 are wheelchair accessible. I had a look at them, and I'm pretty sure that one of them is not. Looking at the size of the rooms, I don't think you could get a wheelchair around there. So I think it's 12, but, that's my reckons, and it's in Dunedin, so I wasn't going to go and have a look. How expensive do you think they are? So how many of those 13 rentals are over $450 a week? A number. Brett?
I think all of them.
All, okay. Simon?
I'd say all.
Erica?
I'll be an optimist and say that one person was good, and I'll say 12.
12. Jan?
I'm going to go for all of them.
Oh. Great. And Greg?
I'll say 10.
Okay, I think, well, it's kind of Greg and Erica. You're,
Greg, you
no, Greg, you're the closest. It's 8. 8 of them were, so 8 of 13 were over 450 a week. Who wants to guess at what the most expensive one was? What price do you think it is, the most expensive accessible property to rent in New Zealand today?
Per week.
Pick a number, Brett.
Pick a number. I don't know. I've been so spectacularly unsuccessful with my 2 choices today. I don't know whether to be an optimist or a pessimist on this one. I'm going to say $750 a week.
$750. Simon?
I'll say 1,500 a week.
1,500.
I'm imagining a real mansion here.
Erica?
I was going to say 1,200 a week.
1,200. Jan?
I was going for 1,092.
92. It's very specific. And Greg?
I'd say 820.
820. The actual number? It's in Glendowie and it is quite close to the beach.
Oh. That would have helped.
No, I didn't have.
It's $965 a week. So,
Sounds like good value.
how many bedrooms? I can't remember. Sorry. But how many of those accessible properties, rental properties, do you think there are in Wellington? Greg?
I would say 1.
Jan?
2.
2.
None.
None. Erica? Simon?
3.
3. And Brett?
2.
Erica, you're right. None.
Wow.
There is no wheelchair accessible rental in the capital city of New Zealand today
That's
on Trade Me.
shameful.
Maybe I picked a really bad day, but that's how it went. Let's have a look at some of these questions from online, and I'll come to the floor in just a sec. I've got lots of questions here, and I haven't had a chance to read them, so bear with me as I quickly scan them. Oh, this is an interesting one. We could maybe have a go at a yes/no on this. What do you think, team?
I don't know about those.
I do. Let's do it.
Feeling myself, yeah.
Will you support money? Would you give money for developing community village type concepts to ensure as much independence as possible for disabled people wanting to live with flatmates? Jan says yes. Greg? Yes. Erica?
We're working on it already.
Yes. Act, Simon Court?
Yes.
Yes. And Brett Hudson?
Yes.
Everybody wants to do it. Oh, it's lovely. See, you can do it when you want to. Let's go down here. What's this one? Oh, now this is interesting. For children with autism, we need houses that can contain them in a safe environment, for example, fencing. Will this be considered as part of the accessible housing policy? Brett?
Yes, that should come under both the review and the current practices of going order.
Simon Court of Act?
Yes.
Erica Harvey?
Yes.
Jan Logie?
Yes.
Greg O'Connor?
Yes, and I just say we're at the Police Association. Well, it was before we had 65 holiday homes, and I was responsible for bringing in a policy of fencing them all so that disabled children could stay there.
Good on you. Now, if we can maybe go to a question or two from the floor on housing, specifically on housing. I will come down here at the front. If you just hang on a second, microphone is on its way. Here we are.
It does relate to housing, but it relates to every issue, actually. Prudence Walker, Chief Executive of Disabled Persons Assembly. This is a loaded question.
They're my favourite.
What will your party do to uphold the specific role disabled persons organisations play under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities?
Brett Hudson.
I'm not sure that I have notes from Alfred on that. Certainly we do support it. Certainly we do. We absolutely support the Disability Strategy 2016 to 26, and we believe it should be implemented across all of those areas of objectives. I'm sorry I don't have the domain knowledge to be able to give you detail.
Greg O'Connor.
Look, sorry, I have that question again, please.
Oh, hang on, microphone. It's probably needed.
Sorry.
What will your party do to uphold the specific role disabled persons organisations play under the convention?
Well, obviously, we endorse the convention. Look, again, like Brett, I can't give you a specific thing that we will do, but I know we certainly endorse the convention.
Simon?
So probably suggestions, rather than us make it up from the top table, it would be actually listening to people like yourself.
Simon Court.
So the ACT Party believes in people's fundamental human rights, their natural rights, and we would support all disabled people to have a voice in any consultation. So if that is what the UN Convention says, then ACT would agree with that.
Erica Harvey.
I'd say the same thing. I think it's a conversation that we have to have with the likes of you and other people to find out how we can actually make that more than just a dream and actually figure out a strategy of how we would implement that appropriately.
And Jan Logie, finally.
Yeah, we've got specific policy to support people with disabilities to advocate for themselves through DPOs and to fund those organisations for that work.
Kia ora, thank you very much. Is there another question on housing in the room? Oh, is there? Oh no, that's someone's. There's one down here, sorry. I got confused by somebody else's hand to do with the camera. Here we go, here's a microphone. Kia ora.
Okay, this is a question for you guys. My name's Emmett Dale. I'm from that committee group, and I have a flat, both houses. For each parties, I choosing the right thing I'm going to say. So you're the best people for each one. So one's not here today, and Tim. Ali party is the blue party. I had this question before. Is it the same, the legal parties for all of them, plus my father's boss on this, because it's really important for you guys. I know I like the haka from the All Blacks team in history. And the houses, when I leaving before at the last committee group.
Kia ora. Oh. Do you have a specific question you want to ask about housing to the candidates?
Yes. When I said before about everything the governance class, when I did last year before for each of teams, so the housing is about keeping the money and getting more things in the government class. Because I heard that from John Key one and many guys beside him, but I'm going to new one now. Number 10.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Before that, you were saying John Keys was in charge. Yeah.
Before?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's Tim Costley now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And housing's a big issue, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! Now I've seen some of his. They've got some of his big billboards up, right, real up high when you're driving on the roads, eh?
Yeah.
I saw them when I was going up the coast. Thank you very much. Kia ora. I'm going to move on because I'm aware that time is getting very short, and the next area that I'd like to talk about is employment. So if you would like to get your employment questions in shortly, but I do have one question, and I don't know. Oh, please don't delete them. Please don't delete them yet. Because I want to ask the last one. Now, I don't know if this is true, but Simon Court, someone has asked online, and it's a question specifically to you. In the Auckland Election Forum, which I think happened a couple of days ago, David Seymour, obviously ACT Party leader, said that housing isn't a disability-specific problem. Now, I don't know if he said that or not, but this person online says that's what he said. So, and the question is, does the ACT candidate on your panel agree with this?
So housing is a problem for all people in New Zealand, and there are different groups who struggle more than others to get adequate housing. And we know that because we hear stories regularly from families with children who can't find a house large enough for the size of their family, or for families with pets. So I can imagine that if it's a struggle for people with pets to find a suitable home, then it must also be a struggle for people with disabilities to find a suitable home. But ACT believes that the housing crisis is actually a crisis that's developed over many decades, and the answers to that are to make more land available to build more houses.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for addressing that specific question to you. Let's go to employment. If there are any employment questions in the room, have a think. Also online, any employment questions, you can start putting them in now. I guess I'm interested in knowing, and I'll start with you, Brett Hudson. Why do you think the employment rate for disabled people is 23% rather than the 70% for non-disabled people? Why do you think that is?
I think because not enough businesses appreciate the value of people with different abilities, what they can bring to their businesses. I think they don't focus on what people can do, but rather worry too much about potentially what they can't do or how their needs might translate to necessary changes in the business or the way the business operates. And I think it's an absolute missed opportunity for those businesses.
Simon Court, why do you think the stats are so stark?
I think it's because business owners, particularly small to medium enterprises, see many barriers to having people with disabilities in their workplace, whether they're providing physical access, whether it's safety in a workplace that has plant and equipment and moving machinery, or whether it's simply that they just don't know any people with disabilities and they just don't really know how they'll be able to communicate effectively with them. So what ACT believes is that those businesses should be much better supported, which is why today we've released a small to medium enterprise business policy, which provides a lot more direct support to SMEs so that they can take on people who otherwise might not be their first choice as cadets and apprentices. So we absolutely recognise that disabled people are affected more than others, and we believe that that is going some way towards addressing that.
Erica Harvey, 23% versus 70%. Why?
I think it's what they have said is that people don't understand where the I guess the value that you bring to the organization that you join, because there's so much value there, and you guys bring so much. I mean, even if I look at my daughter, people that are neurotypical, she delivers so much to them, and so it's a dual benefit between both. So New Zealand First is looking to reinstate WorkBridge as the primary employment agency for Kiwis who are disabled. I think that will help resource and get disabled people back into work. Also, I think there's been a lack of mentoring and even career counseling for disabled students in high school or going into wanting to work and don't know where they would be best utilized. So I think there's a lot of support that we could look at doing there, and it goes around awareness as well.
Jan Logie.
I think it's obviously a history of seeing people with disabilities as other or as a burden, and we haven't done the work yet or had those conversations to fundamentally change that, and that leads to legislation or the idea that being able to fire somebody after 90 days with a disability is a way to encourage an employer to employ them. Which seems to me to be doubling down on the discrimination rather than actually seeking to eliminate it.
I think that's a misrepresentation of our policy, Jan.
Okay. She did. She is the first person on the panel, though, because there was one word I was looking out for, and it was the D word, discrimination. Yeah. You were the first one in with that word.
It really.
Anyway, carry on.
And so, for the Greens, that we need to actively counter that discrimination. We also need to, and resourcing the disabled people's organisations is part of, I think, that whole social change, enabling the voices to come from disabled people themselves and doing that social change work. It's also about ensuring that there's adaptations and equipment and supporting people with impairments in the workplace to be able to fully participate. But it's getting rid of the minimum wage exemption that embeds discrimination and the legitimacy of it in our legislation.
I'm going to have to move on to Greg O'Connor, and if you could be brief, please.
Up until, I think it was 2009, there was a scheme whereby employers could take on an employee. The first year was paid, second year half salary was paid. That gave the employers the opportunity to adapt, to look at the worker, and that was stopped in 2009 through National Party austerity.
So you want that back?
I would like to see a scheme similar to that.
Okay, here's another question that's come in online, which is a good one to follow up here. This one says, do you support quotas for the government sector to employ disabled people? Yes or no, Greg O'Connor?
Of a type, yes.
Jan Logie?
I'm not sure it's our Green Party policy, but yes.
Erica Harvey?
I'm not sure it's our policy either, but yes.
It is now. Simon Court?
We believe in employing people on merit, and we believe that many employers, including the government, should make every effort to look at people's potential rather than just the risks that they might bring.
No to quotas? Sounds like a no to me. Is that a no? No, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to misrepresent you.
It's a no to quotas.
Okay.
Act doesn't do quotas.
Quotas, Brett Hudson?
So we believe there are better and more effective ways to encourage people to employ people with different abilities. We don't believe a quota system is the best way to do it.
Okay, so here's another interesting one that again has come in online. This person suggests that one immediate and easy response to the very real economic disadvantages families supporting children with disabilities face could be supporting income splitting. Who here supports income splitting? Brett Hudson.
That's not a policy of ours. It used to be a policy of the United Future Party. Actually, I know that quite well. I can appreciate the rationale behind it, but it's not National Party policy.
Okay. Would you lobby to have it in?
I would be more than happy to discuss it with my colleagues.
Okay. Simon Court.
ACT believes in giving an income tax cut to all workers. Our proposal is to reduce the middle income tax rate to 17.5% for income up to 70,000. That's about $2,000 in the hand of people with the average wage, and that's how we believe we will actually lift more people into prosperity.
Erica Harvey.
I'm actually not sure with this one, to be honest.
Do you need to phone a friend?
I probably do.
Jan Logie?
We don't support separating that tax. We actually want to see an increase in the top tax on wealth to be able to generate the income for these policies that we're all saying we support but have no way of funding without doing that. But we do support individualising, enable people out of work who have disabilities to access a benefit regardless of their relationship status. And I think that is the key change that has to happen.
Erica's just had a
text
message from Winston Peters or something. I don't know.
Let me read it. I do have a note here, and it just said, so I guess I've prepared for this one already. And I just wrote that one does not become less disabled because they found a partner, and cuts make them more vulnerable by being less independent.
Okay, and Greg O'Connor.
It's not in our policy, but I certainly think there's merit in it.
Would you lobby for it?
Like all these things, I'd like to see the implications of it, but certainly it seems like something that's eminently fair.
Okay, we're going to go to disability support shortly, just so you know. Let's go to the floor. Who here has a question on employment specifically? Oh, is there one there that I can't really see? Oh, hello. You're kind of behind the pillar that's holding the roof up, so I'm glad it's there.
Kia ora. Quick yes/no question. Would you support getting rid of the minimum wage exemption?
Oh, would you support getting rid of the minimum wage exemption? Well, let's go from Greg. Would you actively support it, Greg?
Look, that's one of those ones. I don't know what our policy is on that one, and I'll have to say I don't know. Personally, sounds like it's something that I could support.
Jan?
I campaigned on this about 6 years ago, and I'm still really keen to see it happen.
Erica?
I'd be keen to see that happen as well.
Simon?
So the minimum wage exemption shouldn't apply to people who can reach their full potential. But what I understand is that there are about 9,000 people with intellectual disabilities, people who cannot speak for themselves and who would struggle to achieve the potential that minimum wage workers are expected to. And so I believe in a country that is small, 5 million people, we should be agile enough to allow a carve-out for those people who otherwise would suffer and potentially lose their employment without a minimum wage exemption.
Brett.
We should be agile enough to do that.
How do people with learning disabilities in this room feel about your statement?
Brett Hudson.
That isn't our policy to remove those exemptions, and my answer is no.
Okay, we're going to swiftly move on to onto disability support. We have some questions that are here online. I'm aware that we're running very short of time, and that's entirely my fault that we are not very good at timekeeping, because actually that's me not very good at timekeeping, so apologies. Here's a question from someone watching remotely. It says, there are 500,000 family caregivers in New Zealand, but they do not rate a mention in key policies. Family carers were critical to the success of the lockdown and will be crucial if there is another lockdown. Why are the parties so silent about family carers? How will your party make a real difference to family carers? Quick as you can, Brett Hudson.
Sorry, I'm not aware of our party policy on that.
Simon Court.
So it's clear that families caring for loved ones and family members with disabilities are doing a great job, and a job that otherwise the state, the government, would have to provide for. And I believe, and ACT believes, they should be recognised for that.
Paying
but we
them?
don't have a specific policy around that, but they should definitely be recognised for that.
Erica.
Yeah, definitely. We have already made progress on that. We've reappealed. Oh gosh, I've already forgot the question now. I was so focused.
How would you make a real difference to family carers?
Yep. So we recognise that there are a lot of carers that their main focus is on caring for their family, and we do believe that they should be paid for that service that they do, and we are making progress in this area. I'm just a candidate, so I couldn't give you the specifics, but...
Jan Logie.
So the Greens really pushed hard to make sure that we got rid of that really disgusting legislation and enabled spouses to access and be able to take a court case around denial of human rights and getting that basic pay rate from $20.50 to $25.50 now in legislation. However, recognise that the hours of work and that there will be other people that aren't impacted, and that we still have work to do to make sure that we are truly valuing that contribution.
Greg O'Connor.
Yes, support.
Thank you. Succinct. Any questions in the room on this? Yes, we have one at the back. Microphone at the back. Brett may have to leave us because I know he's got a meeting to get to in Upper Hutt later on.
The transformation of disability services will not arrive in Wellington until at the very earliest 2030. There has been no increase in funding for vocational services for the last 18 years. In the event, at the current trajectory, there will be nothing left in Wellington for the amazing disability community, just as there is nothing for current disabled school leavers to access. Greg, I just want to ask you this because you're closer to this than many of these people. In the event that you or your party becomes government, what would you be able to do to avert this catastrophe?
Greg.
You're really talking about the provision of day services as much as anything else? Is that included in there? And look, the provision of day services is actually seriously lacking, particularly in Wellington. It is like much to do with this disability sector. Wellington, there's a dearth of services here, so absolutely support.
I'm going to very briefly move on to welfare reform now, so if you've got any specific welfare reforms, but we have another quiz, you'll be pleased to know, and it's very quick. Who knows, show of hands, what the disability allowance is? Yes, Erica.
Is it $9.10?
No. This is weekly.
Depends on
it does.
What good a case you can make, and that's
maximum?
like most people with the it's around 30. No, I can't remember.
It's $65.36.
Right. But basically, no one gets that.
I get $9.10.
Children, though, what is the situation for children? How much is the children's disability allowance?
Oh, that's the one that I was talking about.
Weekly.
That's the one I was probably thinking of.
Anyone? $49.26. That's not means tested at the moment. The adult one is. Who would like to introduce means testing for the child disability allowance? Show of hands. Anyone? Oh, you big-hearted softies. So this is situation dependent, but do you know the maximum income limit before tax on that adult allowance? How much do you have to earn before it starts, like you say, going down? $42,000. That's if you've got 2 children. Who on the panel has lived on $42,000 a year before tax with 2 children?
It'd be pretty difficult.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there because I'm also interested in why you might think that working age and disabled Māori receive lower payments on that means-tested benefit than Pākehā, and Pacifica fare even worse. Does that seem a bit strange?
I think denying the levels of discrimination in our country is a bit strange, to be honest. And I think that's a classic example of it.
Here's a question on this. What would your party do about the loss of benefits that disabled people experience when they enter into a relationship? The loss of benefits supports and prevents a disabled person. The loss of benefits and supports can prevent a disabled person from participating equally in society and living with the person they love. Would you cut the benefit, yes or no, Brett?
We have no policy to change, because that while there is a specific question about a person or people with disabilities, that is, or have a broader, more general application as well, and we don't have a policy to change that.
Simon?
ACT doesn't have a policy on it, but it doesn't sound fair.
Erica?
Well, we are looking, we're open to looking into that and changing the way that is.
Jan?
I've already said it's a top priority for us in our policy this year.
And Greg?
Of course, if that person's on ACC, then it doesn't happen. So what this begs is the need to look at broadening out the ACC system so that if you are, I suppose, terrible, but lucky enough to have been disabled through an accident of birth, you don't, this doesn't count. So this is where the discrimination comes in. Whereas if you are, you have, I suppose, a naturally occurring disability, then it does count. So that's the anomaly that's got to be fixed.
Okay. I've just been asked if I can go back. We're jumping around now. Can we go back to support funding? I believe there's another question from the floor.
Sure. I'd just like to follow up on the comments that were being made, because it pinches half my question, but I'll ask it anyway. The disability funding system limps along from year to year. It's fragmented. It's not sustainable, despite recent funding increases. Providers struggle to stay alive financially. Disabled people and families continue to not have access to the services and support that they need. What's your party's policy to not just create a sustainable funding future for the system, but also one that does not discriminate on the basis of the cause of disability? What's the plan?
Well, you just heard my answer to the last question, which is exactly what, where you are not by whether your disability is caused by an accident or caused by naturally. There's no discrimination there.
What's your plan to expand ACC to solve it?
Well, if you'd heard the outgoing ACC minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, unfortunately he was working on that just before he left Parliament. And it's work that needs to be picked up by the next incoming ACC minister.
Will you make sure that it is picked up by the next ACC minister?
Oh, I'd like to be the next ACC minister.
You'd like to be the next? Okay, well there you go.
Yeah,
but we can hold you to account on it in that case if you are.
I would something that it's the biggest underlying so much of the discussion here today, and people understand that is the biggest discrimination in the system. If you are, as I said, lucky enough to have had an accident that caused your condition, you will be better off than if it occurred naturally. Okay. That's the ultimate fix in the system.
Let's just, we're unfortunately running really short on time now. Accessibility is something that would be really great to talk about. While you're thinking about questions on that, and while online questions come in on that, just a very quick thing I'd like to touch on. For those of you who are current MPs, that's 3 of you on the panel, it's Greg, Jan and Brett. can you let us know an issue that was raised earlier? Which way did you vote on abortion? Greg?
I voted, I proposed an amendment that protected, I tried to put in more criteria post-viability of the child, and that was based purely on the disability of my son, that should not be by itself grounds. So for that reason, my amendment failed, so I voted against the bill.
Okay, Jan?
Supported it. It removed horrifically discriminatory language from the legislation, and the changes in terms of post 20 weeks, they are no different, and that actually it enables far more early term abortions because it removes the barriers for access that have been really shocking outcomes, and that actually removes some of that practical level of discrimination.
And Brett?
Just a small point. The amendments that Greg referenced to, he actually made one and then changed it. The Minister responsible, Andrew Little, pointed out that the first amendment would make it impossible, and the second amendment was more liberal than what he as a minister was trying to have legislated.
Which way did you vote, though?
I supported the legislation. I have 3 daughters. To my knowledge, none of them have ever had to seek an abortion, but I expect them and every other woman who is or has to be treated in a way that is not demeaning of them. And I reject the gentleman's question from earlier on. The bill did not introduce any new measures that would enable what the gentleman was suggesting in his question.
Okay, I haven't seen any accessibility questions come in. Are there any on the floor? If not, I'll ask my final question. Oh, there is one on the floor. There you go. Hang on, here comes a mic. Kia ora.
Kia ora. My name's Lisa Foster. I'm the Chief Executive for Rare Disorders New Zealand. So this question is about accessibility, but it actually goes across every area. And it's really looking at, the people that I represent. And there's 300,000 people in New Zealand with a rare condition or rare disorder. Their issue and challenge is gaining accessibility because they're often undiagnosed, or when they do gain a diagnosis, and the average is 5 years with 3 misdiagnoses in between, if they're lucky. 50% are children, and unfortunately 30% will die before they're 5. So there's all of these challenges that they face. But accessibility is a major one. Because we have no strategy, we have no framework, we have no action plan, we find it difficult as a collective to be recognised within government because there is no policy. So just with that in mind and accessibility at the core of that question, what would you do to make sure that people with rare conditions and rare disorders are included within the disability sector?
Let's start with Greg.
Well, I'm not sure that, we have no policy on it. And I'm not sure whether, having heard what you've heard today, whether you would want to be part of the disability sector where clearly funding is such an issue, and it may well be that you would be better to go elsewhere to be included. Just on that, our policy is to increase funding for Pharmac, which will have a direct impact, of course, on accessibility to drugs and treatments.
Jan, I'm going to have to move on really quickly. Sorry. Jan Logie.
And I can't pretend I know the specifics in terms of this. It sounds to me that a strategy and that's developed in partnership and a plan is usually a good idea, and acknowledging that there's also the call for that in terms of responding to the needs of people with dementia.
Erica.
New Zealand First is looking at redesigning how our our health system works with the different pots of funding. So I think that overhaul is part of that, but I'd also like to talk with you after and see what ideas you have and see if we can implement those and work more collaboratively for a solution.
Kia ora, Simon Court.
So I have friends who have had that experience, and I understand it's very, very difficult. ACT doesn't have a specific policy on it, but I would also be interested in finding out more about what I could do if I did become an MP.
And Brett Hudson.
So likewise, we don't have a specific policy on that area. Alongside the Labor Party, similarly, we have announced a ring-fenced fund for rare disease medicines, and I acknowledge that that is merely an incremental step, that it obviously makes some difference, but it doesn't make all of the difference.
Okay. Now, this is the last question, and it's a yes or no, and I know you have to go, Brett, so I appreciate you staying. The end-of-life choice bill, obviously, is going to be a referendum. It's a big deal in the disabled community. Which way are you, Brett Hudson, going to vote?
So I voted for the bill and I will vote for the referendum, but I was one of the MPs that required significant change to the original bill to ensure there were safeguards, which I have reached comfort with, or did reach comfort with.
Kia ora, thank you. Simon Court.
I'll be voting yes so that people can have that choice.
Erica.
Yes.
Harvey. Yes. Jan Logie?
Yes, the Greens, our party went through a really long process in balancing the people with experience of seeing loved family members die in pain, and of those with disabilities and caring for older people and who felt they were a burden and were really worried. So we limited the legislation to a terminal diagnosis in 6 months.
Okay, Greg O'Connor.
I'll be voting yes. I was on the select committee. I heard 3,500 submissions and read most of 38,000 submissions and saw all the evidence, and I believe there are sufficient safeguards in there. It is one person, about one person, and it actually won't involve generally, certainly those with an intellectual disability. So I will be voting for it.
Thank you very much. It's a wrap. Thank you all very much for your time, all of you here, all of you at home, to Brett Hudson, to Simon Court, to Erica Harvey, to Jan Logie, to Greg O'Connor. Thank you very much to our sign language interpreters who have been wonderful. Thank you for listening and watching. Thank you for all the questions. From me, it is Kaki Te Anō, and it is my pleasure to hand over to Taki Pene. Kia ora.
Good opportunity for me. I get the first and the last word. But please, family, IHC and the board have refreshments for everyone. So I like just to say this little saying, ko te kai te rangatira he kōrero. The substance of leadership is discussion. And so please, may we all join in fellowship together and continue that discussion. So I'm just going to give a thought to the food. Sorry, a bit of a different style of blessing of foods. We all bless the food when we join in that discussion while we partake in that fellowship. What I do is give thanks to where this food comes from. So the karakia that I do to bless the food, and I also will close the event so that those that wish to continue on their journey of the rest of the beautiful day can continue as well. But we'll bless our food first. So I give thanks to the fruits that we will receive. From the different areas that they come from the forest, from the ocean, from the riverways, and from the deities that are connected to those areas, and that we all join in fellowship. So, no mai ngā hua te waunui te ngā kino o te waitai o te wai Māori. Nā tāne, nā tangaro, nā haumi e tiki tiki naro. Ko rangi nui ki runga, ko papa tuanu. Ki raro, ti hei, mauri ora. And now just to close our event. As we started our event at the beginning, I did a long karakia to establish a sacredness above us, that we all have one thought today. And we shared in that all the way through this evening. Today is to lift that so that we can continue return safely back to our families, our friends, and whatever areas, pathways that you take. So, hikitia, hikitia, hikitia. Hikitia te reo rongo mai whiti o tēnei hui, o tēnei marau mō wai. Waiho kia iri, waiho kia oi, waiho kia topa, tihei, mauri ora. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, nice to meet you as well.